this a dream? It's gotta be. Not even a kid could believe in this. But when am I going to let go?
While Silent Hill 2 is a standalone story, Silent Hill 3 continues the story of Silent Hill 1, and concludes it in a mostly satisfying manner. While I feel Silent Hill 2 is the best of the series, I do find Silent Hill 3 to be the most replayable. It does have some of the strongest sections and horror of the series, and one of the better protagonists in gaming. That said, there are some sections that do drag a bit. Some of the introspective psychological horror aspects were dialed back to focus more on the cult. It doesn't do anything groundbreaking, but it's more refinement of what came before. That said, it's still one of the survival horror essentials that anyone with a passing interest in the genre should have played by now. So for this video, I'm playing the PC version. It's abandonware, so it's pretty easy to find. If you're looking to play it, check out PC Gaming Wiki for fixes that you could do to tune it up to make sure it runs fine. I did have some odd shadow issues every once in a while, but otherwise everything went smoothly. I did play with the noise filter on. It looked fine while playing it, although it looks more pronounced on playback here. As the game could be dark in certain portions and YouTube doesn't play nicely with it due to its compression, I do recommend watching this at 1440p if you have the internet connection. Development of Silent Hill 3 started shortly after the completion of Silent Hill 2 in the fall of 2001. The team was smaller than it had for Silent Hill 2, with a team of around 40 people here. Silent Hill 4 The Room was also being developed at the same time by another part of Team Silent. Some noticeable absence here were Takayoshi Sato. He's one of the main contributors to the Silent Hill 2 story. Series sound designer and composer Akira Yamaoka mentioned in an interview that Silent Hill 3 was made to tie up the loose ends from Silent Hill 1 due to fan feedback. Some of the staff did not agree with this decision. Now, this was also the same interview where it was mentioned that Silent Hill 4 was initially not a Silent Hill title, but we'll open that can of worms when I cover Silent Hill 4. The team was thinking of making another standalone title more in line with Silent Hill 2, someone being called to the town for a specific reason. It was going to be their darkest story yet. What this story would have been hasn't ever been mentioned, but the team did say that they were going to try something in the daylight. Due to the critical reception it's had over time, it can be easy to forget that Silent Hill 2, especially in Japan, didn't do huge sale numbers, especially compared to Silent Hill 1. This did play a part in continuing the story of Silent Hill. Monster designer Masahiro Ito mentioned that Silent Hill 3 was initially going to be a rail shooter. This was dropped fairly quickly into development, but used up precious time and budget for Silent Hill 3. It does help explain why the game does feel rushed at various points, and the reuse of areas in the Silent Hill sections. On the note of on-rail shooters, Silent Hill would try this direction again in 2007. On the presentation front, all these years later, Silent Hill 3 still looks drop-dead gorgeous. Sure, this is on a PC with upscale textures, but even looking at the original PS2 version, it's still amazing what Team Silent were able to do with the hardware. This was released in 2003. PlayStation 2 still had a number of years left in it. Even then, it's still one of the best looking games on the platform. Team Silent has always been sheer wizards on this front. It doesn't also hurt that Silent Hill 3 has incredibly strong art direction. Of course, this has always been a strong suit of Team Silent. Silent Hill 3, however, feels like a real jump, especially when it comes to the character models. Little details pop out, like the freckles and blemishes on Heather. Unlike the past two titles where the game on occasion would jump back and forth between in-game engine and FMVs, everything here is in-game. As much as I love Silent Hill 2, it did feel at times it could be a bit jarring to cut back and forth between the two. I can understand why they did so, to really emphasize certain facial expressions or emotions. Here, they got to the point where FMVs weren't needed for these key scenes. Characters are able to convey their emotions and facial expressions clearly. So much so that still puts many games to shame that are released to this day. Some games still have that issue with the dead eye look. None of that exists here. In the long run, strong art direction has much more shelf life than graphic fidelity. When you have a team that could pull off both at the same time, you really get something that lasts, and that's the case here with Silent Hill 3. And while Silent Hill 4 came out a year later, I do feel this is the better looking title, both from a graphic and art direction standpoint. The music and sound design, like always, is some of the best ever produced in the medium. With that, I feel this may very well be the peak of the music and sound design of the Silent Hill franchise. Silent Hill 3 would also mark the first time in the series where vocals would be featured in some of these songs. This would mark the first of collaborations with series mainstays like Mary Elizabeth McGlynn and Joe Romersa. The soundtrack is much more in line with the original. The Otherworld sections bring back those harsh industrial blasts that Silent Hill 2 mostly forewent. Tracks that play during key cutscenes can have a light trip-hop feel to them. It's very much of its time, but doesn't feel dated at all. Fewer series were able to meld the music so well with the game itself than Silent Hill. On the gameplay front, well, it's Silent Hill. There's not much here that's a whole lot different of what came before. There is less exploration here on the front of Silent Hill, as we don't go into the town itself until later in the game. A nice addition is having beef jerky to distract enemies. This can really come in handy. I typically just run past enemies, but there are some here that are really annoying to deal with. Another welcome return is having the ability to select the riddle difficulty in regards to puzzles, and good luck on hard mode. I did have to look up a number of these to get hints to get some direction going forward. I really hope you know your Shakespeare, or mapping a face to a keypad. There are some nice adjustments to puzzles as well. For example, with the Shakespeare puzzle in the books, you don't have to go to your inventory for each book. Instead, they're all laid out in front of you. From here on in, there will be spoilers, some for Silent Hill 2 as well, and the first Silent Hill. Silent Hill 3's plot brings the cult back to the forefront, and the events of Silent Hill 1, after Silent Hill 2 was a mostly self-contained story. It's a more personal story than Silent Hill 1, but doesn't dive into the depths it did on that front to Silent Hill 2. We start off as Heather in the lakeside amusement park in the dark, a place we first visited in the first Silent Hill.
Where am I?
Instead of taking time to breathe like in Silent Hill 2 with the descent into the town, the game throws a number of enemies our way very quickly. It also marks a noticeable difference in the enemies here from Silent Hill 2. In that title, enemies weren't overly aggressive, whereas here they're much more tenacious. Not to the extent of the first title, but it is noticeable and something to note. The soundscape also reflects this change. At this point in the series, it's clear that the team felt confident that the player could be tossed into this world without really needing to ease them in. Heather then wakes up. She's in a shopping mall and gives her dad a call. A detective, Douglas, approaches her to talk about her past. Heather gives him some of that teenage sass.
Are you still following me? Do I have to scream?
Sorry. I'll wait here.
I also have to note just how comfy the music is here. It's just two strums of a B major 7th chord, a B sus2 chord, back to B major 7th, and repeat.
Dad, it's me.
Yeah. Sorry I didn't call sooner.
Even though it's just played for a very brief time, there are times I'm replaying where I just sit here a few minutes before progressing forward to listen to it. The track is called And the Small Sanctuary, which is a very fitting name, for shortly afterwards things go sideways for Heather. It has that very end of summer, just before school vibe to it.
Okay, I will.
I love you too, Dad.
Back into the mall now, things are off. Heather comes across this monster and takes it down with a gun. More on the monster design later, but Matahashi Ito, who worked on the prior two titles, returns with another set of excellent monster designs. They're much more visceral here. Just like in the first for Alessa's world and how they appear for James in Silent Hill 2, there's a specific reason for the appearance that they have here. We'll meet Claudia, a woman speaking in vague phrases and a very unsettling appearance. Heather isn't taking any of this and tries to get answers from her before she leaves. I have to give props again to Team Silent for the fantastic voice acting and direction that happens here in Silent Hill 3. I've talked about this in length in my previous videos that can be seen as stilted by some, but they know exactly what they were going for here. They really nail that something is off feel, that David Lynch style. That said, things here are more straightforward than past titles, but still keeps that same vibe. The actress who played Angela in Silent Hill 2 returns to play Claudia here.
I'm looking for my mama. I mean my mother.
Don't you know? Your power is needed.
If you found her appearance off-putting, but you couldn't put your finger on it, it's because she has no eyebrows. In initial designs, they're going to go for something a lot less subtle, such as shaving her head, covering her in tattoos, giving her very elaborate clothes. In the end, they stripped it down to something very basic and off with the shaved eyebrows. This is an effect that David Lynch has used a number of times in his films, like the Mystery Man in Lost Highway to the cowboy in Mulholland Drive.
We've met before, haven't we?
Now you will see me one more time if you do good. You'll see me 2 more times if you do bad.
This can also be used for comedy purposes, like in The Sopranos.
What's different about you?
He has no eyebrows, Tony.
Who did this?
The fact that she has a British accent despite being raised in Silent Hill and her dad doesn't have an accent does lead more to some of that unease around her. And on another character, let's talk about Heather and why she's such a fantastic protagonist. To me, she's the best of the Silent Hill games, and overall one of the better game protagonists around. I did do a poll to determine what others felt was the best protagonist from the Team Silent titles, and James from Silent Hill 2 won, with Heather being second. Although in the comments, some mentioned that James seems the most popular as Silent Hill 2 is widely regarded as the best game. And that's what I agree with there. Silent Hill 2 is the best in the series, but I feel overall Heather is the most enjoyable protagonist to play as. She's the most relatable, the most likable. Team Silent managed to hit that right balance with her. She's likable, she's confident, she's courageous, she loves her dad dearly. Yet she's still a teenage girl. She could come across as a bit of a brat, quick to temper. She conveys a lot more feist and personality than James or Harry, and what the game is going for, it totally works. There's a lot more flavor text here with Heather that gives more insight into her personality and life, like how she used to smoke and quit. Of course, there's also the "it's bread" line that's become well known in the fandom. And unlike James, she doesn't just go sticking her hand down toilets.
Get it. This is way too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
The original design for Heather, she was actually going to be wearing jeans and have longer hair. The character designer got some input from some of the women on Team Silent who suggested she have short curly hair and go with a skirt instead. Her appearance and personality just oozes the early 2000s. Better times. Her name was actually going to be Helen, but after being told it was a bit old-fashioned, they switched it to Heather. Moving on, we got the radio and off we go, descending into the other world. We navigate our way through the mall with a lot of unsettling monsters. It's a great way to start the game. Beyond the Shakespeare puzzle, there's a number of fine items to use at said location, but it works well. It's classic Silent Hill gameplay. After cracking some walnuts and dealing with a boss, the ball returns to normal. Heather continues her odyssey home, heading to the train station while running into Douglas again. Douglas was hired to find us by Claudia. It's such a contrast here to how feisty and passionate Heather is compared to James or Henry.
I'm taking the subway home.
What should I do?
Hell if I know.
The next couple sections here do drag a bit, that being the subway station and the sewers. That said, there is a very unsettling scene on the subway of being pushed onto the tracks. We'll get introduced to some other unsettling enemies and take the train and eventually end up in the sewers. I mean, it's a sewer level, right? Just like Silent Hill 1, we could run through it fairly quickly. Although it is longer here as there's more of a find an item to use elsewhere to progress. But hey, that's sewer levels for you. As mentioned earlier, Masahiro Ito mentioned that time and budget were lost on the focus on the rail shooter to begin with. So it does feel like these sections were a bit rushed. Now, I know that's common for most games. However, I never really got that feeling with the first 2 titles. Not that these sections are bad by any stretch, they're just disappointing compared to the other areas in the game. It's all relative. Plus, nothing really happens on the story front in driving the plot forward here. Things do pick up again once we get to the office building here. There's quite a bit of verticality on floors, opening up shortcuts and some really unsettling moments, especially the mannequin room with the head. We're brought back into the other world. It switches up the layout, what's around us, and of course the imagery. It's much more in lines in regards to Silent Hill 1 in its appearance, a cold, metallic world. Oh, and fuck these enemies who will knock you over constantly. Luckily, the beef jerky will distract them, because if they do knock you over, Heather isn't overly in a rush to get back up. We'll meet another one of the notable characters in the game, Vincent. He's very offsetting and creepy, but in a different way than Claudia. He's not exactly a foe, but not exactly a friend. He always has something up his sleeve. His appearance does remind me a lot of Otacon from the Metal Gear series. In this conversation, putting two and two together, we could find out who Heather really is. She is the reborn baby at the end of Silent Hill 1. There's mention of her mother and giving Harry a name as her dad. In one of the more endearing character moments in the game, Heather gets pissed when Vincent starts badmouthing her dad. The way she hits the door as well adds so much to this scene.
I guess he hid the truth to keep you on his side, eh? That figures. He's a pretty sneaky guy.
Don't talk about my dad like that!
Sorry. I apologize. Please.
Heather's odyssey continues, but what happens there? Well, Harry, the protagonist from the first game, and her dad is dead.
Dad, I'm home. Listen, something really crazy's going on. I think we should... Dad? Dad?
No!
I'm still not sure how I feel about this. How would this have hit different if we got some interaction with him? And the fact that it's an off-screen death here. It's an incredibly well done scene, and we know just how much she cares for her dad. That short conversation at the beginning and how she acts around Vincent when he starts badmouthing him. I'm wondering how the game would have been different if maybe he was on his dying breaths. Or maybe we found him, talk with him briefly before that monster comes and kills him. It's more of a curiosity of how it would play out than feeling like it would be the better decision. Off-screen deaths can feel really cheap in a lot of stories, but I didn't really feel that way here. And after all, this is Heather's story, and this is 17 years later. Before heading off to Silent Hill, we get some great moments between Douglas and Heather. Heather is out for revenge. Plus, we also get to briefly see where Heather lives. Always a favorite trope of mine. Seeing our protagonist's room and home gives some insight into them. Here's where the plot really begins to kick in, and this is one of the largest issues with Silent Hill 3. The first two titles had a pretty clear objective right off the bat, while it's a bit unfocused here until we get back home. Again, the subway and sewer did very little to move the plot forward. These areas could have been used to flesh things out better. And in a series full of such incredible scenes, the scene in the car with Doug is one of the best. It does spell out the story here, but in a way that doesn't feel like an exposition dump. It's a result of incredible directing, voice acting, and having that beautiful music in the background.
After the god was killed, the girl reappeared. She was holding a baby in her arms. Before she died, she gave the baby to my father.
Douglas does mention a missing persons case that he did there years ago but couldn't find. Whether that's James, whether that's Eddie, or someone else, who knows? Now that we know who Heather is, it gives explanation for the appearance of the other world. It is a reflection of Alessa, but there's elements of Heather in it as well, which can lead us now to talk about the monster design. Of course, again, a lot of this is up to interpretation. Some of this is for Alessa, but part of it is also for Heather. It's hard to say at some points where Alessa ends and Heather begins. While there's a lot of imagery about maternity here with the monsters, they're much more brutish and hulking in their design, especially compared to the more feminine design of the monsters of Silent Hill 2. In these designs, you can see the thoughts of childbirth, of fertility, menstruation, sexual assault, motherhood, adolescence as well. This is due to the fact that they're trying to get Heather to birth the god of their cult. We're back in Silent Hill, a smaller section than the previous game, and asset reuse of Silent Hill 2 as we go back to the hospital. It's a rather uneventful entrance into the town. We just end up at the motel. I wonder if the game had more time in development and there had been more in between getting to the motel first when arriving in Silent Hill. We get to the point of what I consider Silent Hill 3's biggest missed opportunity. The team mentioned they wanted to go in a similar direction as in Silent Hill 2. It wouldn't be a direct sequel to Silent Hill 1. There would be much more focus on the psychological horror. So they did dial that back here with Silent Hill 3 compared to the second. There are elements of diving into it with Heather, but it doesn't go quite into the depths that Silent Hill 2 does. It has the cult aspects to deal with, something that was mostly in the background for Silent Hill 2. While I do enjoy both, I do prefer more of the deep dives into the character's psyche. They do explore some really interesting things here with Heather. They really could have delved in more. Where does Alessa end and Heather begin? We do get some insight into Claudia, into Douglas, and to a lesser extent Vincent, but not quite to the depths that they did in Silent Hill 2 with their other side characters. So even though the hospital is reusing assets, there's enough change in what happens here and how we progress, so it's not really an issue, and is one of the game's best bits of really diving into the psyche of Heather. We get into the idea of stalking here with Stanley Coleman being very creepy with these letters. Heather gets used by pretty much everyone in the story here for different purposes. Claudia wants her to birth her god. Douglas wants to help seek his own redemption. And Vincent, well, he's Vincent. He's using her to help with his own intentions with the cult. So there's this one puzzle here when you play on hard with the riddle difficulty of the numbers being portions of the face. Yeah, this one required me getting a few more hints to get an idea of it. Of course, there's that one room in this hospital. You know which one I'm talking about. There's also a very notable room of this ladder climbing section. I haven't talked about yet, but dying in some areas will have Heather dragged away. Another case of examining some creepy stalker territory, there's this very unsettling phone call.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear. Oh, I forgot your name.
Who are you?
Oh, okay, thanks. Happy birthday, dear. Who are you? Happy birthday to you.
Eventually we'll make our way to meet Claudia's dad, Leonard. Heather has some really great sass here.
Leonard? Is that you?
Death to all who turn their backs on God!
Is every person here a mental case? Well, I guess you're not a person anyway.
This hospital section is one of the better sections of the Silent Hill series, and pretty much everything here on in has some of the strongest content from the series. So now we're at the amusement park from the beginning. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we didn't actually play this at the beginning of the game, instead of just jumping into Heather waking up. There's another great scene here with Douglas and Claudia, getting more insight and builds out Douglas as a character, but also Claudia. Claudia is a reflection of Alessa, of what she could have been if she had not resisted and went against the cult. Claudia is absolutely brainwashed and fully devoted to it after all these years. There's this pretty amusing section here with the haunted house. There's some pretty good jump scares in here as well.
Do you know why he said he killed his family? Because I felt I had to! Anyway, I'm lying. It's all just a joke. I wanted to scare you, that's all.
There's another scene here with Heather meeting Douglas, who's been wounded. That's quite touching. It seems repetitive of me to say so, because I pretty much say it for every cutscene that comes up here, but more or less knocks it out of the park. It comes from a great combination of acting, direction, a script, and music. It does give a bit more background into Douglas as a character, and how he thinks, and what he's here for. I also have to note here with the amusement park just how different the graphic fidelity is from between 1999 of the first title and 2003 here. There's a creepy fight with the spirit of Alessa on this merry-go-round, and more of the flavor text here starts to integrate more of her memories of Alessa and hers. For a lot of games, it's typical for the ending sections to feel more rushed, but Silent Hill 3 isn't like that. The back half of the game is really strong, whereas areas like the sewer or the subway earlier sections do feel quite rushed. And this final section is a great way to end. We get a lot more insight into the cult itself, their god of paradise. Claudia is trying to build hatred in Heather to get her to birth the god.
It's growing within you. You despise me, don't you?
She just needed to do a bit of cackling here as well.
Oh, That's good.
Let the hate flow through you.
There's a very noticeable scene here with a confession booth. We can make a decision here that can impact the ending on a second or further playthrough. We can forgive them or say nothing. Some have speculated that it's actually Dahlia herself. By forgiving her, you could say she did it for God or for the cult, or you could say nothing and let it be.
But please, grant me just a small piece of your everlasting mercy. Let me see my child once within your golden gates.
You know, there's another Konami game that I'd like to one day cover on this channel. It has a very memorable bit with a confession room. We have another scene with Vincent, who of course you still can't get a read on, but there's this one line that anyone who's played this game knows.
You feel excited when you step on them and snuff out their lives.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They look like monsters to you? Oh no. Don't worry. It's just a joke.
So he appears to be joking, or was he? You know, when we fought Leonard, the fact that he talked to us yet took a monster form to Heather, what was that all about? It really gets you to think more about other things throughout these series, an incredible use of gaslighting. Eventually we'll reach the end here with Vincent, Claudia, and Heather all in the same room. Claudia kills Vincent, and it's our time to birth the god, but we abort it. And that's another theme that comes up a bit here in Silent Hill 3, the ideas of abortion. In one of the most unsettling scenes in the series, Claudia just devours the fetus.
Looks like God didn't make it.
Stop! God is...
Claudia!
And now we have the final fight with God. It's a well done boss fight that feels, for better lack of a term, epic for what it goes for. And one of those great Heather character moments, she kicks it to make sure it's dead. And then how she breaks down and cries for her dad afterwards. Even though she got her revenge against Claudia, against the cult, it doesn't change that her dad is dead. And with that, we're done with Silent Hill 3.
Is it really over?
Not yet. You're still alive.
Heather, what Heather?
Oh. Just a joke.
You gonna let your hair color go back too?
I don't know. Don't you think blondes have more fun?
Overall, Silent Hill 3 has some of the best elements of the series, but does have some issue with the quality being a bit over the place, especially the first half. Whereas Silent Hill 1 and 2 feel like games the team really want to make, Silent Hill 3 feels more like an obligation, and that was mentioned in an interview. The team want to go more in line with someone being called to the town like Silent Hill 2. Some of the team disagreed with the choice of making it a continuation of the first Silent Hill. That said, the story and game that they came up with here were a slam dunk. There's also the issue of first being an on-rails shooter that took away time and budget from the game. Do recall this was also a smaller team than Silent Hill 2. Team Silent was split to work on this and Silent Hill 4 at the same time. When you look at it, this game had a far shorter development time than the other titles. If they started around October 2001 and released in May 2003 in Europe, that's about 1.5 years. While the time frame isn't known, the on-rails shooter idea may have eaten up a few months before that change happened. That does help explain some of the reuse of locations in the Silent Hill section and why some of the earlier areas don't feel exactly fleshed out. And hey, it's not like games getting rushed out isn't a common thing, isn't it? That said, even with its shorter dev time, Team Silent was still able to make something outstanding that puts many other games to shame. I would have loved to see what they could have done here with another 6 months to work on it. Or in another timeline, a Silent Hill 5 by Team Silent would have explored some of those initial ideas they had for Silent Hill 3. So while I still hold Silent Hill 2 as the best in the series, and I might give the slight edge to Silent Hill 1 being the better title here, Silent Hill 3 is my favorite of the series to revisit. It doesn't do anything that breaks new ground from the previous titles, but it's more of a refinement of what came before. And when you have such a solid foundation to work from, that's totally fine.
And that's about it.
For my poor little Cheryl. I can't believe that. I'm going to Silent Hill, and I'm gonna bust some heads.
Oh, Dad, you're the